Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Tomorrow, it's election day in San Diego. Voters will make their choice for mayor. The candidates went into the final weekend of campaigning with some pretty big war chests. They've been fundraising at a very fast pace. In fact, reporter Joe Girardi of iNewsSource has been following the money all through the campaign. He joins us now from the News Center. Joe, the last pre-election deadline was Friday for fundraising reports. What have we learned so far?
It's the same story as it's been for a few weeks now. David Alvarez and Nathan Fletcher, along with the independent committees that support them but cannot coordinate strategy with their campaigns, have been pulling in the most cash. Alvarez and his supporters have reported more than $1.7 million so far. Fletcher and his boosters have reported more than $1.6 million. A bit behind them is Councilman Kevin Faulconer. He's reported almost $1.3 million. Former city attorney Mike Aguirre is way back with just under $6,000.
And of course, the election is tomorrow. Any chance things could slow down after Election Day?
I doubt it. This last report only covered an 11-day period ending last Wednesday, and the combined contributions to all these committees were close to $500,000 in that period. If this race heads to a runoff, like most people believe it will, these campaigns aren't going to take a breather.
And if we do head to a runoff, where can folks go to keep track of the latest developments?
Viewers can find an interactive graphic, a fundraising map, and a searchable database of contributions at kpbs.org/follow.
iNewsSource reporter Joe Girardi. Peggy Pico talks with the county registrar about preparing for Tuesday's special election.
Despite a growing number of mail-in ballots for elections in San Diego, the Registrar of Voters made a plea last week for more standby poll workers for tomorrow's election. San Diego County Registrar of Voters Michael Vu joins me with more on preparations and what we can expect on Election Day. Michael, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, a few days ago, you asked for these standby poll workers. You said you needed some more that stretched from Del Mar polling places to Serra Mesa. Why the need, and what's the staffing situation now?
Well, for this upcoming election, we have 572 voting precincts, and of that 572, we have approximately 2,500 poll workers that we recruit for. Of that number, about 2,300 individuals will ultimately serve. But normally, we always like to have a security blanket of standby poll workers on Election Day. That way, we know that poll workers that can't make it to the polls will ultimately, we have a standby there ready to be sent out.
And that's all set now?
We're all set.
Okay. The registrar provided video showing the process of handling so many mail-in ballots. Have you received very many in this election?
Well, the city is 52% vote by mail, and of that number, 135,000 of the total mail ballots that we sent out, and we sent out approximately 367,000 ballots. 135,000 are back, and we've been processing those.
That's a lot of ballots. When is the cutoff for mailing in ballots? Can you do it today or tomorrow, or do you need to drop it off?
Well, yes, the deadline to receive that mail ballot, and we have to receive it in our hands by 8 p.m. Election Day.
Tomorrow night. So maybe mailing isn't the best choice?
Mailing would not be the best choice. In fact, if you are a mail-in ballot voter, you have your ballot in hand, the best thing to do is drop it off at one of the 572 voting precincts that we have on Election Day, or drop it off at our headquarters, which is 5201 Ruffin Road.
Yeah, and then it's not just the stamp. What kind of turnout are you predicting this year?
Well, initially I had a higher and optimistic viewpoint, particularly when we sent out those mail ballots. We saw a healthy return coming back. I've lowered that percentage to 40 to 45%. I initially thought it was going to be as high as 50%, thinking of how many mail ballots that we were receiving.
And if you could just remind us as we go up the logistics, when do the polls open and close, and when can we expect returns?
So the polls open tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. And shortly after 8 p.m., we'll release all of the mail ballots that we have received and scanned and processed into the count. We expect quite a number of individuals going to the polls and also dropping off their mail ballots at the polling location.
All right, Registrar of Voters Michael Vu, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Two of the major candidates in the race are city council members. A victory for David Alvarez or Kevin Faulconer would leave an empty council seat, but there won't be another special election for it. Both have less than a year left on their terms, so council will be able to appoint a replacement. Now, the latest poll puts Faulkner in the lead with Alvarez and former Assemblyman Nathan Fletcher in a tight race for second place. Absentee ballots can be a big factor in special elections. And as Peggy Pico takes a close look at mail-in ballots and what we can learn from them.
Joining me is Vince Vasquez, Senior Policy Analyst for National University System Institute for Policy Research and author of a new report on the role of absentee ballots in the special election. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Michael Vu just told us that a large number of San Diegans are voting absentee or with mail-in ballots already, over 100,000. We can't know what's inside those sealed ballots, but you can determine which districts are returning these ballots, correct?
Absolutely. So at National University, we went ahead and took a little bit of a closer look at the precinct returns, and we found that in District 2, as well as the Assembly's 75th District that Nathan Fletcher had previously represented, we're seeing a higher voter turnout than the citywide average. You can compare that to David Alvarez, whose district is actually lagging in terms of turnout in District 8, south of the 8.
What does this tell you about the voters who were, at least the ones that are mailing things in early?
Right. Well, I mean, I think we're really seeing a powerful effect of the permanent absentee voter program. The majority of voters in the city of San Diego are actually permanent absentee voters. At the same time, most of them are concentrated in north of the 8 neighborhoods, places like La Jolla, Rancho Bernardo, Scripps Ranch. That's to the advantage of folks like Kevin Faulkner, Nathan Fletcher, who represent areas that are partially at least north of the 8. But at the same time, we know that the fact that on Election Day, about 100,000 voters are going to be casting their ballots at polling locations, and many of them will be south of the 8, as well as other urban neighborhoods in the city of San Diego.
How does that break down along party lines, or does it?
Well, I mean, we see Republicans and Democrats all throughout the city. Typically, though, the precincts that have the highest percentage of Democratic voters are south of the 8. Typically Latino neighborhoods, African-American neighborhoods, southeast, and the border communities.
Let's talk about that, because so far I understand the turnout is low in these mail-in ballots in Latino precincts. Only about 15% have cast ballots so far. How much of an impact does the Latino vote, or could it have in this election with such a small turnout?
So we already made a projection that the Latino vote will actually not matter as much as it did, or have as much of an impact as it did in the November 2012 election. The reason being is that a lot of Latino voters are what we call low propensity voters. They only vote during the gubernatorial general or presidential general elections. Many of them are difficult to motivate in terms of getting them to the polls. And, you know, there's information costs. The voters need to know what they're voting on. They need to know there's an election. They need to know the candidates. And typically, it's very difficult to find, you know, a real voter group that can make sure that they're really aware of every election and every candidate.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael Vu also predicted about 40 to 45% turnout in the special election, which seems a little low. How could that low impact sort of change the election results, or could it?
Yeah, so, well, we're expecting, since it's going to be less than 50%, there's definitely going to be a higher percentage of Republicans being represented in the total votes in the city. You know, Republicans are 90,000 voters less than Democrats, but especially when these primaries and special elections happen, they make a larger percentage. They're higher propensity as a whole, and they're going to be represented.
All right, policy analyst Vince Vasquez, thank you so much.
Right, thank you.
You can find all of our election coverage online at kpbs.org/election. And tomorrow night, join us for a KPBS special coverage of the results. It begins right as the polls close at 8 o'clock. San Diego struggled for years with crumbling streets and public buildings. Now, the Public Works Department is taking the first step toward doing something about it. It's been given the okay to create a 5-year plan for fixing streets, sewers, and more. Drafting the plan will go on through March, and a final version is expected by next fall. Well, the Navy is trying to learn why a drone punched a hole in the side of a San Diego-based ship over the weekend, injuring 2 sailors. The guided missile cruiser Chancellorsville was doing a radar tracking exercise off the Ventura County coastline Saturday when it was hit. The drone was being controlled from the Navy station at Point Mugu. The Chancellorsville is now back in San Diego. Demand for services from the San Diego Food Bank have never been greater, especially with the 5% cut this month to the CalFresh program for needy families. The food bank got its first large holiday donation today from some San Diego college students. For 6 years now, San Diego's Hard Rock Hotel has teamed up with college students to rock hunger during the holiday season. Cal State San Marcos, UC San Diego, and San Diego State University students raised money and nearly 245,000 pounds of food to help needy families. Jim Floros with the San Diego Food Bank says you may be surprised by the number of people they serve.
A very small percentage who we serve are the homeless. Really, it's the working poor, low-income seniors, military dependents, and active-duty military, children living in poverty.
The food bank feeds more than 350,000 people a month throughout the county. The first big holiday donation comes at a crucial time for families dependent on the Cal Fresh program, cut by 5% this month after a temporary government stimulus boost expired. That's about $36 less a month for families with children. Kim Medeiros works with First 5 San Diego.
There's over 40,000 children in our target age group who live in poverty, and children that tend to live in poverty don't have enough food.
SDSU's president says the food drive is a way for higher education to give back to the community, and the Aztecs raised more money in food than any other college in town this year, nearly 4,000 pounds for the food bank, where you too can contribute at any of the 58 Vons stores around the county. You can either purchase a prepackaged bag at Vons to donate to the food bank or pack your own and drop it off at the grocery store. Every $1 donated to the food bank is enough for 5 meals. Budget cuts have hit law enforcement hard in recent years. Peggy Pico looks at a new report to see how it may be affecting public safety.
A new Sandag report finds local public safety budgets are down, and so are arrests throughout the county. Here with the details are San Diego Police Chief William Lansdowne and Sandag Criminal Justice Research Director Cynthia Burke with a look at the study's findings and what it says about public safety right now. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Great. Well, Cynthia, arrests around the county are down, even with the budget cuts. But your research found there's also been a shift in who's being arrested.
Traditionally, adults are arrested more often than juveniles, but when you consider their proportion in the population, juveniles have always had a higher arrest rate than adults. We saw a flip for the first time in the 10 years of data that we're tracking here and since I've been at Sandag. So adults had a higher arrest rate than juveniles. And we saw that also in other counties across California.
What do you think is behind this shift?
You know, I think that it's hard to say one reason. If I had to make a hypothesis, I'd say that law enforcement's had fewer resources, especially over the past 4 or 5 years. We know crime's been going down, so that's a function of it. But I also think when you look at the switch, it's because the officers are having to make tough decisions about where do they put their resources. And instead of going after some of the status offenses, some of the other offenses, that they're really trying to target those nonviolent offenders, the violent offenders who are out there, and trying to get them off to keep our streets safe.
Well, let me check in with Chief Lansdowne on that. Does a decrease in arrests necessarily correlate to a number of crimes, less crimes being committed?
I don't know that it's less crimes being committed, but I can tell you it's less people being arrested because they're not doing the proactive work that they would normally do. We've seen a rather large reduction in the amount of free time they have to actually do that prevention work in the city of San Diego. But one of the reasons you're seeing it change a little bit, I think, is a lot of it, or not a lot, but some of it has to do with our change in philosophy. We're using diversion for young people, juveniles, that we didn't use before. And I personally think it served us well in the city in reducing the overall crime rates.
And there's a 5-year plan that's been approved by the city that will reverse some of the budget cuts to the police department. How do you think this will change things?
Well, we're very excited about the return to the police department to bring and set it as a priority to bring the staffing levels up. And what it means to everybody in the community of San Diego is we'll have more time to deal with their issues and problems. We'll get the calls, not just the priority calls, which we're getting to pretty fast right now, but the lower priority calls quicker than ever before. And it means that we'll be able to provide better service, and that's what they're asking for. They want to be able to get on the phone and we show up in a reasonable amount of time to deal with their problem effectively.
And at this point, you've, because of the budget cuts, had to triage, I understand, sort of go to the first, most critical things first?
Well, what we've done is gone to our core service, and the core service is getting to calls when needed and going to those calls first that have life-threatening possibilities to it, and property crime second. It's the property crimes where people are making the largest complaint that we're not getting them quick enough.
Okay.
And just to add to that, 90% of crime is property crime. So it is most of the crime that is reported.
Most of the crime not being able to have the resources to get there. Prison realignment makes the county responsible for monitoring now a larger number of convicted criminals. Let me start with you, Cynthia. Do you think there's any indication that this shift is affecting crime in the county or will affect crime in the county?
I think there's no way to say it can't. In the fact that these individuals were coming back to San Diego County regardless of public safety realignment, but when you look at how much time they're doing in our jails or in prison, how they're going back, the number of credits for time served, the hammer's not there that was there before. So we are seeing that property crime's going up more in the western part of the country as well as in California. So it's not just San Diego. And I think that it's one factor. Is it the only factor? No, but I think it is something that we need to stay on top of.
And Chief Lantano, how is the police department preparing for this? Or, well, they're actually dealing with it, but how are you going to move forward on this, sort of anticipating maybe a spike?
Well, what we've seen in the last couple of years, an increase in crime across the county of San Diego, not just San Diego, and it correlates with AB 109. We're starting to track that, but what we've done, and we've gotten some money from the government, from the state, it's about $1.6 million. We've formed county-wide task forces, and we're doing closer supervision and more monitoring than ever before. And I think in the long run, that'll serve us very well in the city. But what we need is a very strong, proactive realignment and then reentry program.
And working together.
And working together is critical.
Seems like it's started. Thank you both so much. I want to let folks know the San Diego Public Safety Study is on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Nearly 60,000 Californians have signed up on the state's health insurance exchange. But what about mental health benefits? Are they covered? Speak City Heights reporter Megan Burks joins us from the News Center with this week's Second Opinion. Megan, we're hearing a lot about canceled insurance policies. Of course, last week, the President, Obama, said insurance companies can take an additional year to phase out old plans. What does it mean for covered California?
Well, the exchange is still moving forward with its enrollment goals. A lot of these policies were canceled because they didn't offer the full array of services required under the Affordable Care Act. Any new plans, including those on covered California, do.
And one of those new requirements is to offer mental health benefits. Tell us about this week's question.
Yeah, this week's question comes from Sandra DeLonzo. She's studying social work at USC's satellite campus in San Diego, and she wants to know which mental health benefits will be offered by the new plans. Here's her question.
When I graduate in May, I will be looking at covered California plans, and I wondered what kind of mental health services are available under the different plans.
So, Megan, what benefits is she entitled to?
Well, California actually already had a law on its books saying insurance companies must cover mental illness as they would a physical ailment. So if you can get outpatient services, hospitalization, and medicine for a heart attack, you can get it for depression too. And the law says it shouldn't cost more.
And does Obamacare offer anything new for Californians with mental health disorders?
It does. Depression and other disorders will no longer keep you from getting insurance or cause you to pay higher premiums. And depression screenings and behavioral assessments will be offered free of charge. So that's a pretty significant change. And to see if anything changes for you under the Affordable Care Act, check out our web app or send me a question. Go to kpbs.org/secondopinion.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, we continue our series of personal stories from healthcare reform. That's Monday on the PBS News Hour.
Extinction may no longer be a one-way trip thanks to scientific advances. A national discussion could lead to the revival of extinct species, and a couple of San Diego scientists are part of it. KPBS business and environment reporter Eric Anderson tells us the idea of raising a dead species is also raising questions.
"20 years ago, Jurassic Park filled movie theaters with images of living dinosaurs. The moving magic added a simplistic shine to the science.
This fossilized tree sap, which we call amber, waited for millions of years with the mosquito inside until Jurassic Park scientists came along. Using sophisticated techniques, they extract the preserved blood from the mosquito and, bingo, dino DNA.
Real science wasn't quite ready then, but now the researchers have developed enough tools that the idea of reviving an extinct species isn't so far-fetched. Oliver Ryder is a geneticist at the San Diego Zoo. He looks after arguably the zoo's most valuable collection.
So this is the room that holds the tanks that comprise the frozen zoo. This one holds the living cells that are in suspended animation.
Nitrogen freezes tissue samples from about 10,000 individual animals. They represent about 1,000 distinct species.
But if there's one thing you could save, it would be living cells. Cells are fundamental units of life. They are able to replicate themselves. All organisms start their lives or live their lives as a single cell.
Each cell contains a complete genetic blueprint. Ryder says these tanks hold the potential to change the evolutionary path. Right now, the collection only has tissue from one extinct species, a bird from Hawaii, but it might be the only hope for another species that is rushing headlong toward extinction.
We have cells from 12 northern white rhinos here. There are only 7 alive on the planet. We have their cells, and we have cells from unrelated individuals and their parents that predeceased them.
Ryder says those cells could be the key to keeping the rhinos alive or even bringing the species back after the remaining animals die. That's territory the Zoological Society's Michael Mace is familiar with. The Society's curator of birds helped the California condor fly away from extinction in the 1980s. That 22-bird condor population now has nearly 400 birds.
If we're working with species like condors that have a very finite gene pool, the ability to recruit genes from museum specimens, for example, could change the playing field genetically.
Tapping into a new source of genetic code would be like finding an undiscovered population. It increases genetic diversity, and it boosts chances for species survival.
We have a planet that every day another species is lost. And so people are starting to put those concepts together and say, we've got critically endangered species declining, we've got ecosystems that are disappearing, and do we have the technology to stop some of those big concerns and issues that are affecting all of us?
But propping up a species on the brink of extinction isn't as controversial as raising a species from the extinction pile.
Mastodon, mammoth, other types of species. It's a very complex science to be able to do that. It's an even more complex and compelling discussion about whether one should.
And not everybody thinks that's a great idea.
I would like to hear a good reason for doing it other than because we can do it. There are lots of things we can do that perhaps we ought not to do.
Suzanne Holland is a religion professor at the University of Puget Sound. She's not sure that lifting the stamp of extinction is good for people or the planet.
We have critical healthcare needs. We have critical scientific funding needs. This does not seem to be, as far as I can tell, at the top of any list to the benefit of humanity.
But the argument isn't being waged with absolutes, and even Holland says there could be legitimate reasons to bring a species back. A potential candidate for de-extinction is the passenger pigeon. The bird was shot out of existence, but northeastern hardwood forests are suffering as a result. There's a push to bring passenger pigeons back so they can distribute the seeds crucial for the forest's survival. Geneticist Oliver Ryder says some scientific issues still need to be worked out, but many tools are already in place.
The possibility of cloning has been around for over a decade. The possibility to induce pluripotency, that is to make skin cells into stem cells, has been around for 4 or 5 years. What's energized this discussion has been bringing back extinct species.
Oh, perfect timing. I'd hoped they'd hatch before I had to go to the boat.
Henry, why didn't you tell me? I insist on being here when they're born.
The science may be catching up with the science fiction, but researchers are still debating the ethics of de-extinction. That discussion will more than likely write the story. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Push. Very good.
More clouds than sun in our forecast later this week. Temperatures in the more seasonable mid-60s along the coast, down to the 50s at night. The picture is pretty much the same for the inland valleys, with temperatures in the mid to upper 60s and overcast. The mountains could get some rain later in the week, with nighttime temperatures in the 40s. As for the desert, partly cloudy, mid to upper 70s. And a quick reminder, tomorrow is Election Tuesday in San Diego. Voters go to the polls to choose a new mayor. Turnout is expected to be between 40 and 45%. The polls will be open from 7 in the morning until 8 in the evening. When the polls do close, we begin KPBS special coverage of the results. The first returns expected to be released just a few minutes after 8. So join Peggy Pico for our election special tomorrow night right here on KPBS Television and simulcast on KPBS Radio at 89.5 FM. You can find tonight's stories and download the KPBS app all on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Good night.